Yeah, I said weird. It was weird how he got the boot so early on. Hey guys, MasakoX here. Now, judging from the fact that some of you guys enjoy the notion of me describing something as weird, we're going to be rolling with that nugget of a notion and probing into the idea of a Dragon Ball villain that really didn't get much of a look in on paper, but did kick off a lot of things happening in the Android saga later on in Z. And that is, of course, Dr. Gero. We're going to be trying to explore the ideas of an evil genius, and not why we probably think that maybe this was Toriyama's answers to the likes of Dr. Wily or other archetypal mad scientists that was so prevalent in Western cinema, something that Toriyama was a devotee of if you watched my other discussions or have checked out various publications with Toriyama doing an interview. But let's be real here, that does sound like something Toriyama would do, yeah? Okay, Masako, but why are you being so harsh to a show that we hold so dearly? I get what you mean, and usually I'm pretty forgiving when it comes to Dragon Ball Z. But if I'm too forgiving too much of the time, things could get rather stale. You can only talk about a particular show or a particular medium for a particular amount of time before it just gets repetitive. Just that little illusion there. And therefore you can't look back at it with as much desire or passion as you would have done in your youth. Because things change. Now that we're older and wiser, it can't hurt to try and look at a show that we held dear from our childhood from another angle, as it were, try and see things differently. Yeah, it doesn't hurt. Not only that, but since we've been dissecting the likes of the Boo Saga recently, Haverock and I thought it might be a nice idea to sometimes probe the ideas of different DBZ arcs. Don't just single out the Boo Saga. See what made them tick, see what made them great, or weird, or wacky, or just bleh. By taking this stance with a show that has touched the hearts of millions across the world, we can really delve deep into the composition of something, what made them the way they were. See what worked, see what didn't work, see what didn't age well or somehow got better with age. For this segment, we're going to be looking at the Android Saga, the lesser known precursor to the Cell Saga, to focus on the overlooked and underused elements of narrative. Now when it comes to underused characters, I can think of one right off the bat, and that is Dr. Gero. After being hyped up in the future Trunks saga not that long ago, you remember, when Trunks was talking about this seemed like this was going to be the big bad guy, and at the time of Toriyama actually publishing this, it was. Here's an excerpt from what Toriyama intended for Gero in the full-color manga of this arc back in 2014. Dr. Gero's an evil genius scientist. In order for the Red Ribbon Army to achieve world domination, he developed artificial humans as weapons. With normal mechanized weapons, there's the risk that they will pass into an enemy's hands and be used by them. So he took the drastic step of developing artificial humans who possess the ability to think for themselves. Now, Gero wasn't just some random Red Ribbon Army scientist like one of many others, nameless. No, Dr. Gero was the scientist of the Red Ribbon Army. The Red Ribbon Army's weaponry was all made by Dr. Gero. Gero was a founding member of the army to begin with, and was also effectively in control. So he wasn't just the scientist here, he was one of the key players. And the Red Ribbon Army wasn't just some kind of little known organization, it was one of the major organizations of the original Dragon Ball. It was a rival to Capsule Corp. It is part of Dragon Ball's DNA. To finally get a chance to meet or take on one of the formidable beings of that organization, and was responsible for many things that went on in Dragon Ball, was a huge deal. It filled in a massive hole when it comes to the narrative here. This was almost in terms of scale when we found out there were other universes in Super and the Battle of Gods movie. For someone with that kind of level of scope and significance to the overall plot, his screen time, Gero's screen time, was shockingly limited. If you think about it, he shares this trait with the likes of King Cold and Barbody, with the latter getting the most out of a meager lot. Gero, when you boil things down, is the mastermind type of character, and while the likes of King Piccolo and Frieza implemented similar traits, and you could also describe them as being masterminds in their own way, Gero wasn't the strongest of the three, but he was the smartest of the three. And in this case, it goes to show that brains were better than brawn. Yeah, get it? Because when we first see him, he's actually just a brain in a jar, kind of like Dr. Wheelo. Oh, sorry, what was I? Ah yes, masterminds. And while there are other mastermind characters in Dragon Ball, Toriyama seems to love those, in our most humble opinion, Dr. Gero is the one that is the most nuanced and most developed in terms of traits and personality. And really, that's kind of more than any other Dragon Ball villain that we can think of. Okay, what do I mean exactly? Let's start from the beginning, or to be more precise, from a retcon. Well, at least from the anime standpoint. You see, we have to go back to the time of the Muscle Tower element of Dragon Ball, with the likes of Dr. Frap, or Flap, or however you want to pronounce it. That was confusing in of itself, but that was still the most crucial part of the Red Ribbon Army's development, but it did get quite weird, and it got weirder in the English dub because things were really implied and wires were crossed that Commander Red was the younger version of Dr. Gero, or that he'd already met Goku in person, which he hadn't. It was pretty weird to really go through all that and try and make heads or tails of it. But when you think about it, in the late 90s and early 2000s, most countries didn't really have much to go on because they either skipped Dragon Ball entirely, only to come back to it later on, or simply the dubs just forgot about Gero altogether. All that mess aside, I still love the idea that it's Dr. Gero that ties Dragon Ball Z back to its roots in Dragon Ball. And in a really dark and sinister way too. We had recently gotten the Super Saiyan trope, which was Dragon Ball Z's calling card telling everybody that it was certainly not like its predecessor. So immediately after that, we got a thing saying, no, we remember our roots, we remember the Red Ribbon Army. No, we're still intrinsically the same thing, just slightly more evolved, slightly more super. They still remember the show's legacy. Nice touch. And granted, the Red Ribbon Army was a pretty goofy organization, especially in the early days. But with all of Gero's antics in Dragon Ball Z, things became far more formidable and much more serious. Although it wasn't fully revealed in the series, his path towards revenge against Son Goku led him down a very dark and twisted path. Which, you know, resulted in him kidnapping 2 teenagers, even though they were delinquents, and turning them into game-ending machines. He wasn't really that nice to his own creations, destroying most of them when deeming them unnecessary or incomplete or just a straight-up failure. Android 8 in any other field would have been a completely big success in the field of artificial intelligence, but no, to Gero, he's a total failure because he can't really take out things and won't destroy Son Goku, the thing he was built to do, so therefore, useless. I mean, how cruel is that? And really, if that was the only thing to go on, that, you know, he was a mad scientist and he made robots and didn't like them, there's not really much else to talk about and you could easily forget about him. But the one thing that keeps him in our minds, and really something to behold, is the inclusion of Android 16. Arguably, one of his most noteworthy creations. Now, I'm pretty sure that in the year 2018, that what I'm about to say to you isn't that much of a surprise or a shocker, but only go back maybe 4 years, and it would be a very different story. Time flies. For those of you who would like a refresher though, in an interview from 2014, Toriyama confirmed that Android 16 was developed off the back of Gero's departed son. Something that we expanded upon in DBZA when Goku took on the Red Ribbon Army headquarters, and, you know, one thing led to another, and that would have resulted in Gero enacting revenge upon Goku specifically. Just meshing things. And what was even more of a revelation is that it turned out that Gero intentionally made Android 16 much more docile, much more gentle to try and avoid the risk of getting in a battle and then being destroyed, well, effectively again. And this was because, in Toriyama's own words, Gero couldn't handle the idea of losing him again. And while GT tried to expand on the and yes, GT did try and build upon the idea even more by stating that Gero's intention was to replace all humans with artificial human beings. At the time, in Z, that wasn't known to us, so I'm not really going to expand upon that. But, you know, in GT, that was a thing. In Toriyama's head, despite his outward persona, Dr. Gero wasn't the completely evil person. Something that is very hard to believe when you first see him, because I remember that scene when he just shot I-beams in that city, and it was just so precise and cold and cruel. It was just like, okay. And it's very rare in Dragon Ball for a character to be so clinical. Usually they like to talk and hear the sound of their own voice, but no, that was pretty much foregone. We don't know the exact circumstances of how Dr. Gero and his son got involved in the Red Ribbon Army in the first place, whether he was in on the ground floor or he just came in later on, but if we're willing to sympathize with the likes of Vegeta, who was under the tutelage of Lord Frieza and was therefore committing atrocities which could be arguably even greater than what Gero ever did under the Red Ribbon Army, we should give Gero and his son a bit more credit. For all we know, Dr. Gero's son may not have been a good person when he was a human, and maybe Dr. Gero, by making him more docile, tried to see the good inside of his own son, which implies that Dr. Gero wasn't all that bad. He was trying to better the world by making sure that people didn't die. People lived forever. And, you know, because 18 and 17, they don't age, or at least they age much more slowly. But what's important here is that Toriyama wanted to convey that there was a human side to Dr. Gero, even when he turned himself into an artificial human. It meant that he could keep going forever and that mortality didn't take him. Toriyama did manage to expand this even further by including the likes of Android 21 in Fighters, and something tells me that Toriyama had wanted to do this for the longest time, try and develop Gero in some way, and this was the perfect opportunity. I don't know, but I just feel this whole storyline with Dr. Gero is really important to Toriyama. And if you think about it, troubled father-son relationships are very common in Dragon Ball, and this is just one of them, and probably one of the most tragic. Almost every major male character has some kind of issue with their father in some shape or form, be it very small or something very significant. King Cole didn't really care that much his son Frieza got chopped into bits by future Trunks. You know, that was water off a duck's back relatively. And then we have Dr. Gero, who held his son in such a high regard that he chose to make a robotic clone of him. Was it that idea to recreate his own son part of his revenge? Maybe, likely, but not exclusively. This gives him much more depth rather than just destruction, power, grrr, that most villains have in Dragon Ball. That's why I just cannot overlook Gero and his place in the series. Now, he shouldn't be forgiven for the atrocities that he committed, but in the end his flaws were very human. Someone stole the life of his son, and in order to enact upon his sorrow, he chose to go down the path of revenge, something that does happen quite frequently. In the end though, his own creations have outgrown him in a major way. I have said this before and I will say it again. Android 17 and 18 have undergone remarkable development within their time in Dragon Ball, especially the likes of Android 18. You know, going from a teenager who was rather flippant and just really crass, to someone being really doting, one of the best mothers in Dragon Ball, and probably one of the best characters in general, and just, oh man, 18 is so cool. And with 17 in Super, that was one of the best things about it. Their inclusion in the story, and Cell's impact on the franchise as a whole, is really owed to one sad, sick man's terrible dream. So next time anyone throws out that Yu Kondo quote that this was just an old guy in a fatso, you know, just saying, oh, this was just nothing, say to yourself that this is one of the most important villains in Dragon Ball's history. Certainly one of the scariest, you know, due to the fact that his motivations are terrifyingly real. And that's very rare in Dragon Ball. Revenge fueled by lust is as old as the world itself. And revenge is a dish best served cold. So what do you guys think? Do you like Dr. Gero? Do you prefer his own creations? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Until the next one, be sure to like and subscribe. Catch you later!